Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Senior Editor David Patton, and we're delighted to have with us today Representative Michele Bachmann, the three-term Republican member of the House of Representatives from Minnesota. Representative Bachmann, thank you so much for joining us on Newsmax TV. Well, one of the things that we know about you that's just fascinating to a lot of folks, and they may not all be aware of, is that you have not only 5 children, but 23 foster children, so a total of 28 children. And what I want to know is, first of all, what motivated you and husband Marcus to take on this huge responsibility? And secondly, how do you fit so many people around the dinner table at Thanksgiving?
Those are great questions. Both my husband and I have always had broken hearts for at-risk kids. And I think it was fortuitous that both of us came together and were married, because we really shared that same heart and that same love. We were so thrilled with our 5 biological children that were born into our family, but we also saw that there were needs outside of the family. And I had worked as a federal tax litigation attorney, and my husband is a clinical psychologist. He was into his practice, and we were at the point when I was expecting our 4th baby that I was really realizing my ultimate dream, which was to be a full-time mother at home. So I was about to go home and be a full-time mother and focus primarily on the children. And we decided at that point, we saw a couple in our church that was doing foster care, and we were prompted in our heart, and we thought, you know, maybe we could do this as well. We'd always had a real heart for kids. We'd reached out to kids and tried to be a solution. But we thought, now, what about actually taking them into our home and being surrogate parents? And so we started with 1 child. And then we got a call, could you take another? And then we got a call, could you take another? And the highest number of foster children we had at any given time were 4 foster children and our 5 biological children. And we didn't get the foster children when they were babies. They came to us as teenagers because there were tensions at home and it just wasn't going to work out. We were a good way station. And so we would keep children on average, not always, but on average for perhaps 2 years. And so our job was to make sure that we graduated the children and successfully launched them into the world. And it was a wonderful experience for all of us. We're so happy that we could do it. They're really great kids.
Really amazing, and they're all grown up now, and
they're grown up now, probably in their 30s, yeah, I think, for the most part, and they're really wonderful. And the second part of your question was, how did we fit them in the home?
Yeah, how did you fit them around the dinner table?
You know, it's an interesting question. I have a good story, because when we had our 4th foster children come into our home, and then we had a 5th baby born to us, all of a sudden the table didn't work anymore. And so my husband and I had to put a room addition on in the kitchen so we could get a large enough table. So we put a room addition on, and it was all worth it. If that's the most difficulty we had to go through to make this accommodation, it was well worth it. And I will tell you, that was the #1 room in our house. It was highly used, and we had a huge kitchen, huge kind of a country kitchen, and it was where all the kids had all their friends, and all of our memories take place around that table.
Just an amazing story. Well, another thing a lot of people probably don't know about you is that you were raised a Democrat.
I was.
And you actually worked for Jimmy Carter's 1976 campaign.
I did.
And in fact, I believe you met husband Marcus there.
My husband and I had met actually prior to the campaign, but he suggested that we work together on the campaign, which we did. And after Jimmy Carter was successfully elected, then we were invited to attend the inaugural ball in Washington, D.C. My husband and I came from very simple backgrounds. We'd never been to Washington, D.C. before, and we thought, oh, wouldn't this be exciting? So we went with the team from our area. We went to Washington, D.C., and we were very honored and excited, because our state senator, Walter Mondale, was elected the vice president. So we had a pride of our state, the fact that Walter Mondale was the vice president. We danced at the inaugural ball. And so after that, after we saw Jimmy Carter's policies and what they were doing to this country, we changed our mind. We were no longer Democrats, and we voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980, and we haven't looked back since.
Can you tell me a little bit about what specifically motivated that political conversion? One account is that it was reading the story Burr by Gore Vidal, the novel.
Yes, it actually was. I was on a plane, or on a train. I was headed from Minneapolis down to Winona, where I was going to college, and I was reading a novel by Gore Vidal named Burr. And in it, he was mocking the founding fathers, in particular George Washington. And I was repulsed by mocking the founders because I grew up a Democrat, but we shared very strong values, a patriotism and a love for the country, like a lot of Democrats do. And I had a high regard for the founders. And I was reading the book, and the way that he was being snotty and mocking the founders, and he was coming from a very hard leftist perspective. And I put the book down in my lap, I turned and I looked out the window and I thought, you know, I don't think I'm a Democrat. I must be a Republican. And so I started to open my mind up a little bit more and look around, because I'd grown up with the tradition of being a Democrat, and realized actually what I believed was more represented in the Republican Party than the Democrat Party. And so then we switched, and the rest is history.
Now, you were a federal tax attorney.
That's right.
And gained a lot of experience on a practical end with the tax code. I was curious, how does that inform now your commitment to reduce taxes and to really kind of shrink down this federal government that's in almost every aspect of people's lives these days?
That's a good question, because my scholarly background is in the United States federal tax law, with my doctorate, my postdoctorate degree in federal tax law. But the practical is also very important, because working as United States federal tax litigation attorney in the U.S. Federal Tax Court in St. Paul, I litigated civil cases, criminal cases, and so I saw who the culprit was, who the person was who was usually being fraudulent in filing a tax return. But I also saw the other side. I saw how the law was often very unfair in the way it punished individuals and businesses and farmers with the tax code. And I saw how devastating high taxes could be on people, and how unfair technicalities and loopholes could cripple a person. But I also saw, my husband and I started our own successful company. And so as a job creator, I also have witnessed firsthand how high taxes harm me from being able to start more jobs and create more jobs in our area. And so I want to pay my employees more wages, higher wages, and give them greater benefits. But when the tax code is so high and compliance is so difficult, it makes it far more difficult for me as an employer to be able to create more jobs. And the best example is Obamacare. Obamacare will be enforced through the IRS. Imagine that. That's how Obamacare will be administered. You'd think it would be through doctors and nurses. Hardly. The most heartless organization that anyone knows of is the IRS, and they will be the enforcers of Obamacare.
Well, now, one question a lot of people want your view on is 2012. What is it going to take to defeat Barack Obama in 2012?
Without question, what it will take is a bold, strong, constitutional conservative message challenging President Obama on his record, because the record that he has left the United States is one that shows that our children will have a far reduced standard of living than what our generation has ever experienced before. What has the president done? He's seen us lose literally millions of jobs. He spent us trillions of dollars into debt. It isn't that Republicans were very fiscally safe with our money. They weren't. They had a problem. But they aren't even in the same moral universe as the spending under Barack Obama. So he has spent us to death. He has not allowed job creation because of his policies. He's hurt us with environmental protections that have gone way beyond the pale. And Obamacare has crippled job formation going forward. So on every level, the president has let us down, and most recently on foreign policy. The president has deeply disappointed not only the people of the United States, but people in other nations by his actions unilaterally dealing with pulling the missile defense shield out of Poland and Czechoslovakia and not consulting with our allies, with unilaterally going into Libya on his own and then dropping that problem into NATO and putting American soldiers now at risk, and with the pronouncements he's made that Israel needs to give up land that will never bring peace. The president has been wrong on nearly every front. And again, this isn't being personally negative to the president, but it's saying that the president is taking away a future and a hope for current job creation, but for the next generation of Americans. That's what I'm worried about as a mother as a job provider, and also as a member of Congress. I'm worried about that next generation, that they have a better life than what we had. President Obama is not the answer to them. We need someone who will look out for our kids and the next generation.
Many exciting months lie ahead on the campaign trail. Congressman Michele Bachmann, thanks so much for joining us on Newsmax TV.